The following is a conversation with Diamant Salihu. In 2021, Diamant published an amazing book called Until Everyone Dies. This was a book about gang violence and crime in Sweden. It was in this same year he was awarded the Grand Journalist Prize in the Voice of the Year category and was the host of the very famous and extremely popular radio show Sommar Talks on P1. This is a conversation about gangs, drugs, violence in Sweden, the Swedes, Swedish culture, immigration, integration, and how it came to be that Sweden exists with totally parallel societies. Because for my Swedish audience, this topic will make complete sense. But for anyone else listening who is unaware, Sweden has the most gun deaths per capita in Europe, the most grenade violence per capita in Europe, and a whole number of per capita statistics that do not indicate the perfect Swedish society for which they have a reputation. There is a lot more context I would like to add, but I won't belabor this introduction any further. This podcast took me 5 hours to put together, but will only take you 5 seconds to review. So swipe up your app and leave the thickest, healthiest, most juicy review you can muster. Hang around to the end for my afterthoughts and for my ambition of the podcast. And with absolutely no further ado, here is the great Diamant Salihu. We'll start with where I was supposed to start.
Yeah, sure.
You featured on Serendipity this summer. Could you explain to the audience what that is and then explain what your experience was like doing it?
So Sommaripet is a huge radio show that is aired during summertime and also wintertime actually. But every day, every day there is a new host. Very often a well-known host for the audience, and they tell their story, their successful story, or something traumatic that they have been experiencing. And this year I was one of those hosts, and I was asked to talk, and I could choose whatever I wanted. And surprisingly, I choose the topic that I'm always covering, which is the gang violence, but also in combination with my own personal story. Because I was born in Kosovo, and I came as a migrant child as a 7-year-old and started my journey here in Sweden. I lived in a farmland of Kosovo with cows and horses and dogs and hens and all that. And then I did a time trip to the modern time in Sweden, and I talked about that as well.
So open it up.
So what was the second question about?
I think you answered it. The first was, what is the show?
Yeah.
And you mentioned famous people. I mean, for example, the ABBA members have been on, PewDiePie's been on, I even think Avicii might have done one while he was still around. It was basically the who's who of Swedish pop culture, and then sometimes as well international people might feature. And it's just the most wonderful format. And, you know, as someone who doesn't speak Swedish, I don't listen to Swedish ones, but they sometimes will put them out in English. Anyway, so that's what it was. And then you very temptingly opened up on what you spoke about. I say continue on.
So I tried to my purpose with the 1 hour show was to make the listeners understand the topic that I'm covering about gang violence, and I started talking from a child's perspective, children that I've met, that I've been doing stories about, and how they're experiencing the violence, the shootings. Because I think that a lot of people, they are so numbed by what's happening, and most of the people in Sweden are very far from the violence. So it's easy to just turn it off and bother with all the other problems that people have in their own lives. And but I think by listening to a child and the fear of a child, that makes everybody listen on another way, and that was my way in to tell this story and also tell my own story. And what is very good with that show is also that you can use. You have to play music as well, so it tells something about the person's music taste. And I choose to also play some Albanian folk songs that I grew up with that means something to me. And that was very. A lot of people has reacted on that and given me a lot of support, and also, other in my situation that came as children to Sweden that has done this migrant trip, they can relate to my story even if they are not from the same region that I am from. But it's been very interesting and a way to, for listeners to get to know me better, because I might be known in some circles, especially if they are interested in journalism or in gang violence. But for the average Swede, not so many probably knew who I was before this, even if many people have heard about my book. But I think the radio show is that as a friend said, how do you say, the Swedish way to adla, when you make somebody a sir in UK.
Yeah, to knight them. Yeah, exactly. So my friend, the Swedish friend, told me that to be a host on Sommar is like being knighted in the UK. Okay, so Sir Diamant.
Yeah. So that's basically what it is, and I'm happy that they asked me.
Nice. You have hinted a little bit about what the subject of it was, and as well your book, Until Everybody Dies. You mentioned there as well this idea of the parallel societies. The regular Swede, and most people are so separated from the violence. Give us a sense for what's happening in Sweden that, my listeners in the English-speaking world will have no idea about.
I think for many of your listeners might see Sweden as a great country, safe country where you can, you don't have to worry if you get sick or if you have a baby. That's probably the best country in the world to live in, because I just became a dad. My wife is at home taking care of our child. She will be at home for 1 year, and she will get money from the state to be at home. I will stay at home for 4, maybe 6 months after that, when our baby daughter is 1 year old, and I will get paid from my employer and also from Försäkringskassan, as we say here. So we have the best opportunities to go in school, to get help if we get sick, if we need to go to surgery or whatever. But when it comes to segregation, we've had in Sweden a huge migration the last decades, but the problem has been that people that have come here are not being so spread out in this big country that is actually bigger than Germany. If you just look to the geographical part, the area. Many of the migrants have moved to specific suburbs, maybe to places where they have people from the same background, speaking the same language, and that has made these areas very segregated and isolated. And especially if some of the areas are consists of people from some regions where the migrants have been nomads before they came here. They have not had possibilities to go in school and get an education. So when they come to Sweden and they move to same areas, and they realize that it's really difficult to get a job, because you need an education in Sweden. You need to have a qualified education to get a job. Because even if you're born here, it's difficult in some branches. And imagine then not knowing the language, not having an education. And another thing is that Sweden has still no demands on those that are coming here that they have to learn the language. In many other European countries, they want you to learn their language before you get citizenship, for example, before you get a passport in that country. But here it's being discussed now. But so far, some years ago, there was a party here that suggested that you should demand people to learn the language before they get the citizenship, and they were called racists at that time. And now there's all the parties are united in that the people need to learn language because that's the best way to be integrated in this society. But the result in all this has been that we have very isolated areas, like isolated islands around the big cities in Sweden, where we have huge migration, people with other backgrounds, and high unemployment, high segregation in schools. So in these areas you might have 100% of the children might have a background in another country. And imagine once their parents don't speak Swedish, then the children can't really learn Swedish either, because they cannot get the same help with their homeworks from their parents. And the comrades in the schools say they don't speak the same language as children that are growing up in wealthier areas as well. So this segregation in the suburbs, in the schools, it leads to a new generation that have been growing up here in this great country, but having less opportunities than most of the children here. And among these young, especially guys in these areas that have not succeeded in school, that are coming from dysfunctional families, among these guys, we have the problems with the gangs. They're shooting each other, killing each other because they want to take control over the drug market, which is also very huge here. The consumption is happening elsewhere, among wealthier people that can afford to buy cocaine and amphetamine and ecstasy and so on. So we are all a part of the problem, but violence is happening among people that are the most vulnerable in our society.
Mm. So we'll definitely get to the drugs and the violence, because that's really the meat of it. But first I kind of want to understand more maybe the structural issues of it. So you came here when you were 7 from Kosovo, came from a farm and in a time machine, came to, nice modern Sweden. Did you feel segregated growing up?
When I came in 91, I was 7 years old, and I moved to a small town in Sweden called Borlänge. It's in the heart of Sweden, and I lived in an area that was quite poor, but it consisted of poor people from every kind of background, even Swedish poor people. But we were surrounded by people living in big houses with good jobs, and we went to school together. So we mixed up in school, and we played handball and soccer and floorball and hockey and so on. And we could very easily integrate with each other. But if I go back to where I grew up today, there's been a huge segregation there, because I moved from there. Many from my generation that got an education, learned language, found a partner and a job, moved away from there. So those that are still there, many of them haven't had the chance to move from there, or they also consist of new people that have moved there, that are poor people, uneducated people. So we have the same problem in my hometown where I grew up, as we see in the bigger suburbs around Stockholm, Gothenburg, Malmö, where the extreme violence is going on. So I'm afraid and worried that the similar problems that we have here will also start in where I grew up.
Where was everyone from? You said even Swedish people, so that suggests that the majority was maybe from former Yugoslavia.
No, we were from Kurdistan. We were from South America, from somebody from some from Somalia and other African countries, and a lot of people from the former Yugoslavia. So and some people that were Swedes or had a Finnish origin somehow, because it was really mixed up.
So the reason I asked that question is just to see whether there is a cultural difference between when you were growing up with a bunch of other immigrant kids versus now where they're growing up around a bunch of immigrant kids, but whether there may be a different cultures that are influencing what's happening, and as well a different drug market as well. For example, I mean, in Rinkeby and the places that you're alluding to, it's like Afghani, Syrian, Somali is the majority immigration sort of, what would you say, cultures? No, ethnicities, I don't know, nationalities. Does that question make sense?
I think
the cultural difference between.
I think when I grew up, we were so many from so many different countries that it was difficult for one culture to dominate. So, I mean, during the years that went and passed by, all of us got integrated, learned Swedish. Even those that came from other cultures and had a lot of opinions whether their sisters could play with boys or so on, those guys got most integrated and ended up having children with Swedish girls. But when it becomes more segregated and more homogenic segregation with more people from same country, I see in the areas that I visit as a journalist that the traditions from back home still hang on and keep the claws on people, even those that really want to evolve, integrate, and live more freely. It's more difficult for them, especially women. And that's the case in some parts of Rinkeby, where I have been covering and written about the conflict in my book, but also other places around Sweden. So the culture from people's backgrounds still hang on in another way than in places where it's more mixed up, where people can integrate.
Give us an example of that. Someone who perhaps wants to evolve but is being drawn back because of their family and the local community they're with.
I met young girls that I've interviewed telling me that they, for example, a young woman that moved from Somalia, she was uneducated. She grew up in a refugee camp, and then she could learn to read in Sweden, and she really wanted to integrate, to learn the language, to make a career, but she felt that the clan mentality from Somalia was so strong still in where she grew up, where she was living in my hometown, by the way, in Borlänge. And I mean, her parents, her siblings, they turned her back. So her parents and her family turned their back on her because she wanted to break free from those traditions. So that kind of young women, they face huge problems because they want to be free, but they have, I mean, all they have is their family. And it can be, there are some similarities to some, I mean, to sects in a way. It's very hard to break free from. But some of these women are so brave, so they're ready to break free from even from their own families to live their own life as they want to.
And have you met people that have done just that?
Yes, one of the women that I've met and reported about has told her story, and I mean, started to live her life without her family because they wanted to keep her. I mean, they didn't want to accept the life she wanted to live, and she's very brave. But that kind of stories, we have that kind of stories in many areas in Sweden, because they're very segregated, and the traditions and culture from some countries can be so strong in the community, which makes it more difficult for, especially for women, to break free.
Can you give us a sense for some of the numbers? How many people have immigrated from where? What, say, percentage of... I don't have specific examples, but for instance, as a journalist, when you're writing a book or when you're reporting on areas, like statistical data that you would refer to try and make a point?
I mean, if I look into some areas, they can have 80% of those living in some areas, or 90% can have a migrant background. And I know that some decades ago, those areas consisted of Swedish workers, and they moved away. And now these areas are very segregated, and those that have moved there, they don't want to. I mean, a lot of people want to have the areas more mixed. And they tell me, "Can you see any Swedes here?" They're all gone, which is also a part of the problem. And to move away from the area is very difficult today, because the housing market is very difficult in Sweden. You have to buy an apartment to be able to live in central parts of Stockholm. It's extremely expensive. And even if you have 2 jobs, it's really difficult to save money to be able to buy an apartment, because we don't have rental apartments as you have in Berlin, for example, in the central parts of Berlin. It's very easy to, I mean, here in Sweden, a lot of people, especially in the big towns, they own their apartments. So, which makes it more segregated. So the wall to climb over from the segregated area to the more richer areas is huge.
Yeah, the housing market in Stockholm, but I suppose it's Sweden more broadly, is very peculiar. I just think of it as an Australian. We have famously one of the frothiest property markets in the world, but that's largely because it's a very friendly place to save foreign capital, but also as an asset for investment. And so it artificially raises the prices because a bunch of people own multiple homes that might not necessarily live in them, and then they will rent them out to other people, which artificially raises the median price of rental. But nonetheless, in Sweden, you don't have that, which keeps the prices relatively down. But as you point out, it also completely ruins the rental economy. And so you either own or you don't. And it definitely drives segregation. I haven't thought about that. But you sort of touched on something there. How much blame do you level on the Swedes for the lack of integration?
Yeah. Yes, Swedes are. How much should we blame Swedes for being part of the problem with the integration? Of course, that's a huge reason that we have the situation that we have. Quite often, when I meet people that have migrated to Sweden, they tell me that nobody basically requires anything from them. So they're like, welcome to this country, but left in an area where nobody from this majority society talks to them. So welcome, but take care of yourself, basically.
That's exactly how my girlfriend puts it. And, you know, she would never admit to it, or people would never say it publicly, but there's this sense of, you're welcome, deal with yourself over there. I'm going to keep living my life. You're welcome to be here, but I don't necessarily want much to do with you.
Exactly. And that's the way a lot of people experience their situation. And also, I think it's a part of the big problem that we have here. Because in these areas, people have been living for decades now. And are there? Some of them haven't found jobs yet. Or they find part-time jobs. They feel... They tell me that they have experienced racism on the job market, that because of their color they have difficulties to find job, or because of their names they cannot find a rental apartment or a job. So all these the feelings that you're left behind and the feeling that you have to take care of yourself they're intensified because of the situation that we have. And in these areas, we also see that less people, they go to vote. And I've done stories about this as well and asked them, why not? And they're like, my vote doesn't count. Because do you see any changes where I live? And then I can't say that I see any changes, because the problem is that they have a lot of violence in some of the areas, or relatively much violence to compare with. I mean, I don't know if I compare with Chicago, it's not comparable. But they feel that they're like the second class people.
Do you feel that sentiment?
How?
Almost as if you're welcome, but
For me?
Yes, you and your friends, and in your own experience.
I mean, as long as because I've managed to have a successful career here, and I don't feel that in any way, because I have managed to do this for myself. But I understand the people that feel like that, because it's really difficult to get to know people if you're not really, I mean, if you don't have that kind of job there where you meet Swedes. I mean, I know from many friends that have another background that are professionals that tell me that it's really difficult to learn to know Swedes, because I mean, they're not that open.
But it's true.
Is it true?
I think it's definitely true.
Okay.
You know, I'm an Australian, right? And I think I have an unfair sort of culture coming in here, because people just generally like Australians. You know, so I'm lucky that way. But the Swedes I know are kind of like my girlfriend's family. You know, truly know that you could be really friends with. It's very few people, and I think that is definitely a part of the Swedish culture. Of it's difficult to let people in, more than just say a fika. You know, have them over to your house for dinner. You know, get to know them, reveal personal things about yourself. So I can definitely imagine if you are, say, you know, 27-year-old ambitious guy from Rinkeby, speak Swedish, want to get a job, maybe you don't have the best grades, I can sympathize why you might to resent Swedes and potentially think they're racist, which I think is wrong, but you can understand why they might think it.
Yes, I mean, at least I, as a reporter, have to accept that they feel that way because of the experience that they've been having for many years, and which is very bad. Because I mean, I don't think that we can change Sweden and make. I mean, people are the way they are, but the segregated areas that we have now makes it even more difficult to make it easier for people to meet in a natural way where they can actually find that they have the common interest.
Sure, 100%. Yeah.
And meet at the grill or the bar or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But now you don't have that kind of places to meet.
Yeah. You profile many individuals in specific interviews. You mentioned some young women who are already in this interview. Is there one person who really stands out to you as being almost this archetypal example of what the problem is at the heart?
Maybe in one interview I've done for SVT, which is from a school in Rinkeby where I meet 10-year-olds, and I ask, or their teacher asks them about their future plans, and one of the boys says that he doesn't really know what he wants to do or will do when he gets when he grows up. Why? Because there are so many shootings here, many people are being killed. I might be killed, he answers, and he's 10 years old. And I think that exemplifies the problem, that what's happening now also affects the next generation, and that I, as a majority society, can't really close our eyes, because we cannot wish that these problems will vanish. There needs to be some changes, because that boy doesn't deserve this. He's born in Sweden. He should not feel that way. He shouldn't be afraid of that. And I think for me that exemplifies what this problem is about, that we together need to do something, and that this is a problem for all of us, not for them.
And why does he feel that way? What is the problem?
The problem that he feels that way is that he grows up in an area that has, at least historically, have had a lot of problems with shootings. Relatives, friends of the family, friends to the classmates that have been killed, threatened, heard gunshots during nighttime, or seen blood stains on their way to school. That's the reason that he feels that way, because it's a reality for him in a way that it shouldn't be. And if I ask my friends' 10-year-old daughters, if I ask my friend's 10-year-old daughter, and he lives in a really wealthy area, or what her plans are for her future, she has totally different answer, because she can really dream in the way that she's supposed to as a child.
Yeah. Is it at this violence, the reason why this guy feels that way and why he's hearing gunshots and seeing bloodstains on the way to school is there's this year already is the most gun deaths ever in Sweden's history. and we're not even at the end. We still have several months more, right? So it's a particularly bad statistic. Is it just competition over drugs and gang competition that is driving this violence, or is there also a sort of romanticization of violence and, you know, hardcore gangsterism?
I think there's a mix of all of that, because now there's a wild west in the gang community, because a lot of guys have been arrested, a lot of the leaders, they're behind bars, because Sweden, together with Australia and US, French authorities, there's been an international collaboration with different crypto chats, and a lot of criminals from all around the world has been arrested. And here in Sweden, they have been sentenced already to 2,200 years in prison, only in Sweden. So there are a lot of leaders in the gangs behind bars for a long time, and the vacuum that has become after them, there is a young generation trying to take that spot. And they have internal conflicts, and they have a lot of guns, and they don't hesitate to shoot each other. And there is also a fascination for the gangster life. Some say that these are groomed to this, they're recruited, and yes, that's of course true, but some also they want to be part of that, to have this meaningful spot, because they maybe have not succeeded in school, they have problems in their families, they don't belong, they may be bullied in school. So in the same way that people are being radicalized in all kinds of groups, this is so similar to that, I would say.
Can a comparison be made to, say, you know, Chihuahua in the northern states of Mexico, where in your little town, for an ambitious young guy, there actually is no other option than to join the local gang? For instance, to tie into what we were saying earlier, they might not feel like they can enter the Swedish job market for X and Y reason, their name, poor education, etc.
In a way, yes, but Sweden is not Chihuahua, so it's not Mexico here. We don't have that kind of problems. We still, if you grow up in Sweden, you still have all opportunities to fulfill your dreams. You have free schools. That means you can go to higher education and become an astronaut if you'd like to, and you would not pay anything to do that.
You get paid to go.
You even get paid. You can get money, so you can afford to move somewhere and study and pay the rent. I mean, I don't think that's the way in Mexico or not in the US. So I mean, it's not comparable in that way. But from a Swedish context, there is obviously a young generation that feel that they don't have any options, and that the way to the Swedish society is so far away, and also they cannot even relate to their families in many cases, even though those that have a migrant background, they have been growing up here, maybe never had a trip to their home country. That's also something strange, far away. But the Swedish society is also far away, so they're in a limbo between two worlds. So in that way, I can understand them, but I won't agree that they don't have any opportunities. They do.
That's a really interesting thought on like having identity issues almost. Do you find that when you're interviewing these guys and girls that they almost feel like they belong nowhere, or the only place they might belong is in their small group of friends who all experience the same thing as them?
Exactly. So they feel that they don't belong, so they find their own identity in these kind of groups. in a similar way that some become hooligans, some go to Syria and Iraq and join ISIS, or join a motorcycle club. They find that they belong to they can belong to a group that they can identify with. They don't have these shirts that tells what they call themselves. They're just friends, but criminal friends.
Is the problem unique to Sweden? Do you see comparable gang violence, not maybe on the same level, but at least the same, some identifying markers are similar in Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, similar Northern European countries that have such good, prosperous life?
There are some similarities in the violence, but Sweden is unique in that way that we have a lot of death shootings per capita, and especially among young shooters. The young guys, especially here, are extremely violent, according to research that has been done, comparing other countries with Sweden.
That'd be very interesting research.
Yeah, they look at the... Yeah, but they look how old the guys in the gangs here are, and the victims, and they see that the victims are very young.
How young?
I mean, around 20 to 29. And what's different from, for example, from Germany, is in Germany that you have clans, you have motorcycle gangs, they're more hierarchical, so they have a leader in the top that would probably educate the youngsters how to behave and when to commit a crime and not to commit a crime. But here they are more leaderless. We have the organized criminals as well, but much of this violence is happening among leaderless networks, young guys, and maybe the best thing would be for them to have to be part of an organized crime, organized group. To be honest, if you compare to Denmark and to Norway and UK, the big difference from UK is that UK has much lesser death shootings in these criminal gangs than Sweden, even though there are much more people living in UK, but they have a huge problem with knife stabbings instead, because there are laws against...
it's like a weapon denominator.
Yeah, but they have a very strong laws against carrying guns, which makes it not worth carrying a gun when you risk a lot of years in prison. And in Denmark, they have these laws where you can get the double sentence if you commit a crime as part of a gang conflict. And now it's being discussed in Sweden, and the new government that we have, they are pro adapting the Danish gang laws to the Swedish laws. So we'll see what happens.
Was it 52 deaths this year so far?
I think we have now 51 death shootings. And counting.
And it's not just guns, right? There's like crazy grenade violence and lots of cars being burnt out and stuff.
Yeah, so the gangs, they have arsenals with guns, automatic rifles, and also explosives that they use against their rivals, and also to put pressure on people that haven't paid money. So we have some cases where family members have had their awakened to a hand grenade outside of their door. That also affects a lot of neighbors, and it's a way to put pressure when you are in debt, which some people are. A reason to that is quite often mentioned is that it's very easy to smuggle weapons and narcotics to Sweden. We have Öresundsbron in the south that links Sweden with Denmark. And I mean, couriers that I've been speaking with that have been smuggling drugs, they tell me that it's very easy. They're not even worried when they pass the border, because they know that there are very few checking the borders. They cannot check every car. So there are a lot of drugs and also guns and explosives entering Sweden, which makes it very easy for guys in the gangs that want to have a bigger share of the drug market or kill their rivals to use a gun. Also because the risk of getting caught is very low. If you look at all the death shootings, around 20%, 1 out of 5, is being solved and taken to court.
That's a crazy statistic.
Yeah.
How do you explain that?
A huge failure from the police, because they have been getting more resources over the years, but not really adapting the resources to what they really need, which is well-trained, educated, how do you say, utredare? If you're, so the police have been the police in Sweden has gotten more personnel, more resources, basically everything that they have asked for, but still they cannot solve the murders in the gangs. And something that they don't have done enough is that they have not educated the right. I mean, they haven't they have not adapted to the situation that we have with the gangs. So they need officers that know how to deal with this kind of investigations that are complicated, but they don't have enough of investigators and with the proper education. And for every murder that they get in their area, there are so few that can investigate those cases. So they cannot manage to get the murders caught. That's a part of the problem. And also they lack some tools when it comes to surveillance and some laws.
Maybe this cryptic chat is going to be a huge part of it.
Yeah, I mean the cryptic chats. There's like a gift from above from the French authorities. I mean, so they have to thank French police officers for helping them and giving them the information from the chats. But I mean, when I speak to police officers, they often, they're mentioned that there's some laws in Sweden that needs to be adapted to the reality. And because some countries have better laws that are more adapted to organized crime than Sweden is. I think that is also a part of the problem.
You've written that there is or said on TV, maybe it was transcribed, but that there is a naivety to how bad things are getting.
Yes, I think it's a naivety because if you, for example, look to some of the local police, local authorities where the violence has not come yet, they think that this is something happening in the big cities still.
You say yet?
Yet, yeah. Because, the last year we've seen shootings in smaller cities. And when there is one shooting, there will probably be another or a third shooting. If the police can't manage to get these guys caught, then there will be revenge shootings. And, we have the social service they work with laws that are adapted for the total different problems. That you have a dysfunctional family, but with alcoholism, and a dad that's not so. That's not a part of the family, the core family. But now we have totally different problems where we have children acting as child soldiers, selling drugs, carrying guns when they are 8-9 years.
And that image alone that you just said is kind of unthinkable if someone thinks about Sweden and just the generalized understanding and reputation of Sweden.
Yeah, if you before, when I grew up, I was looking at the movie. I think it's called City of God. I think it's from Brazil.
That's a hard movie.
It's a hard movie. Yeah. But if I would compare to anything, to this generation that we have now that are growing up in Sweden, I don't want to compare it totally with City of God, but in the bubbles that some of these kids are growing up in, it's more, they can relate more to the City of God than they can relate to the life that I live. Because they live in such a violent world where a murder is possible every day, where they can get shot to death or stabbed to death or for any reason, because that's part of their reality.
If they're not related to the drugs.
For the children that I met that are afraid of the shootings and they're trying to go to school, even even those children that are very far from they're not involved in the violence themselves. Even those children have a fear to become victims.
That really drives home the point of parallel societies. Just totally separate worldviews and daily experience.
Yes, they're and that's maybe a part of the naivety that a lot of people have, because they're used to dealing with totally different problems. But the problems that children have and families have nowadays are more comparable with maybe Brazil or some extreme parts of the world.
So the book is called Until Everyone Dies. How much of that is, a provocative title to sell books versus the actual sort of sentiment and the hyper-gangsterism that you experience when you interview these guys?
I think the book and the title really puts a finger on the problem, on what this world is about. There is no loyalty at all.
No loyalty.
No loyalty. The guys, they think that they are loyal to each other, but they're unloyal all the time and turn each other their back, put their friends in traps so they get killed. And seeing all the killings that are happening in these gangs and that I write in the book is all about shooting each other, hunting each other until everybody dies. And the title also comes from one of the guys that is being interrogated by the police, and the police officer tries to understand why they're having this war. War is a word that the guys themselves use to describe what they are doing. And he says, when he's being asked how long will this go on, and he answers, until everybody dies. And now when I'm writing a new book, I see even more darkness, murders, and when I read the chats, how they plan murders, how they put pressure on the child soldiers to stay outside somebody's home and wait to kill that person. It's all about waiting to kill everybody else. So I think it really says what this problem is about.
The TV show Snabba Cash is a fictional show, obviously, but it sort of takes one angle of the drug crime and the gangs in Stockholm. Is there any relatability to that? I don't know if you've seen it, but it's, I mean, huge in pop culture, right, as a way that people might access this world. Do you know if there is that any type of accurate representation of how things are going down?
I mean, it's obviously a drama series. So, but some parts are realistic, I would say. Like children.
They emphasize the school thing quite a lot.
Yeah, I would say that at least in season 2, they try to show the young children that are being recruited and into the gangs, which is, I mean, it shows the reality. They're very young children, seeing this as an opportunity to succeed, to get status, to get money. So but I mean, the reality is more dark. There are a lot of tragedies in the families that I would like to see. If I would do my own movie or series based on my book.
Just to be far more real.
Far more real and dark. The in-betweens, between the shootings. The children coming home, sharing a room with several siblings, having a dad that's not at home at all, having trauma from the war, a mom taking care of 7, 8 children alone, not knowing the language. I mean, being very far from this country, even that they live in this country. Well, I mean, that's maybe what I would like to see more of.
Yeah, it really paints quite a picture of desperation. You know, it makes you think, how does one get out of it?
In the series?
No, in real life.
I mean, education is the best ticket out of that life.
So the Swedish state needs to just allocate its significant resources away from, say, heating public lakes. I don't know if you saw the towards schools or.
Yes, of course. If we look at the statistics in the Swedish vulnerable areas, 3 out of 10 pupils in 9th grade, they don't get grades so they can go to the gymnasium. And if you look at the average in Sweden, 90% succeed.
So to say that again, 3 out of 10 don't qualify to go to year 10 when they're 16 years old.
Yes, exactly. And some schools, they are more than 50% of the children that they don't succeed. How come? I mean, if some of these children don't succeed, even though they are grown up in Sweden, they have had all the opportunities. I mean, I've heard from teachers that are working in these areas and principals that say that they have failed because I mean, they're not putting demands on the children either, because they're like, these children, they can't do anything. So we don't have to put the same demands on them as we would have to in other schools. And also they don't have qualified teachers. So that's also a big failure. So obviously there is a way for all of these children to succeed by going to school. And it's important to say that many of these guys in the gangs, they have brothers and especially sisters that are living under the same conditions but succeeding, studying and going to higher education, living a totally different life than their brothers, because they live in Sweden. So there is always a way out in Sweden. In a way that I don't think it would be possible in Mexico or Brazil because you're a poor person. Here, even a poor person can
Like
become.
a high school certificate can apply for secondary education in CSN.
Even a poor person can become a prime minister in Sweden.
Something that never gets spoken about, that I see at least, and this is the same case with Australia, drug crime there, Belgium, Mitchell Prothelo, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, he's producing a long series of podcasts at the moment with Project Brazen about the drug crime in Belgium and the Netherlands, specifically heavy cocaine importing ports in Antwerp and Rotterdam. In Mexico and America, something that is never spoken about is the end consumer. And I say it, one should be ashamed, really, to consume cocaine just casually and not feel guilty about the trail of blood it leaves behind. It truly is probably cocaine, specifically maybe methamphetamine, the bloodiest supply chain of any product in the world. The most death, the most pain. And so why is this not spoken about more? Why are the Swedes who have started taking more cocaine or smoking more weed not, shamed and at least told, hey, you're also part of the problem here?
I'm trying to say that in different interviews. Actually, I don't think people cares. I mean, I talked to a social worker that takes drugs when she parties. And she's like very aware of the problem. But when I asked her, why do you buy products that you know that they will buy guns and bullets with? She's like, I realize that, but only if I change and if I don't buy drugs, this will still be a problem. So it's easy to just put yourself out of the problem because you cannot do any change yourself. But I mean, how will this change if everybody thinks like that?
For example, there is this one person can't make a difference sort of nihilism that can creep in easily, say with climate products. I don't buy plastic that isn't recyclable, or I won't buy clothing produced in China or in India or H&M or fast fashion. Like, there's so many ethical reasons why you might not purchase one thing or another. But I think drug use is almost, it's less easy to make that argument because there are way less substitutable goods that you could otherwise have, and there's also a huge social stigma attached to it as well. And I think actually you become a more respected person if you can turn around to your friends and say, like, I'm not doing any of this because it's shit. And as well, there is a lot of pain and violence attached to it.
Yeah, but I think, it's a huge difference. I would say from when I went out partying, and if I go out to have a dinner now, I'm 38 years old now. But when I went out 10 years ago, I would say rarely in Sweden saw people taking drugs openly. I knew that they did, but not in front of me. And now as a 38-year-old, I've seen with my own eyes guys taking up cocaine in front of me in the pissoir and taking it up to their nose. They don't care. And I hear from friends that go to parties with people that are successful, and they see drugs being consumed in these parties as well, by people that have successful careers, maybe are leaders for companies, It's happened so much during the last 10 years, and I think a lot of more people are more liberal when it comes to using drugs. The same way that maybe Europe has been for a long time, that is now come to Sweden as well. I don't know how it's in Australia, but probably the same.
I'm trying to find really good guests to speak with this about, but I think Australia could potentially be the highest drug takers per capita in the world.
Really?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that, especially cocaine and pills, maybe not pills, especially cocaine, maybe methamphetamines. My own experience when I haven't lived in Australia for a long time, but when I grew up, a few guys maybe would take pills on the weekend. No one would do cocaine. I went back for a wedding this summer, and it's a very, very jarring experience to be at a party and all of a sudden half the room are crowded around a dinner plate.
Really?
It's a for me, very jarring experience. Because I have I've never taken it, and I don't think I ever will. But I think, I don't know what it is. I'd love to get a very sophisticated explanation from a sociologist or an anthropologist or something, but it feels like drug usage, and not just, the sad, depressive methamphetamine addiction, like recreational to have a good time, escapism type drug usage has definitely gone up in Australia. It sounds like it has in Sweden as well, from your own experience. Do you find it quite unattractive to see men who are almost in their 40s, just pull out a bag of cocaine?
Yes, I think it's, why is not alcohol enough?
Booze is enough.
Yeah.
It does the job.
Yeah, and I don't really understand, and especially when we have these problems that we do in Sweden. If most of the people that I can see, if we talk to people that are educated, they know that they sponsor the gangs, but they don't give a shit. Which is, maybe it tells something about the problem, that how should we do something about this if we don't give a shit?
That's part of, you're welcome, but you go over there.
Yeah.
I don't want to see.
Sell my drugs, but stay over there.
Yeah. No,
Sell me drugs, but stay over there.
So there's two ways it could go. One, you heavily criminalize usage in addition to criminalizing distribution, or you go the other way and just try and liberalize it all and create a free market, for a legalized free market, not an illegal free market, for cocaine, for methamphetamine, and you just accept that they degrade society, but it's kind of like taking a teaspoon of poison rather than a pint, which might be if you continue to criminalize it and see deaths and communities destroyed.
I have no opinion.
Which way do you lean? More criminalization or more freedom?
As a reporter, I stay away from giving my opinion about what I think is the right way to go to in that matter.
You can just tell me.
No, but actually, I have no clue.
Yeah.
Because what has it done any good in US or in Portugal or in the Netherlands? Can you give me a good example where a liberalization has turned out to be something good?
Well, I don't know enough about what the legalization of weed did in America. Supposedly, not much. Maybe the final products became better. But in the Netherlands, I lived in Amsterdam for several years. I saw there was definitely upside to the legalization of taking pills, party pills, speed, ecstasy, MDMA, because these are produced locally there is less of a, maybe I'm just being naive and assuming this, but less violence attached to the distribution of those drugs, and you could legally take them. You could go to a festival and you would have a per person usage.
Can you do that in the Netherlands?
Yeah. So you can have something like 3 pills on you per day at a festival. So if you go away for a week-long festival and you're caught with 15 pills on you, you don't get in trouble. But if you get caught with a bag of 100, now you're selling, so then you get in trouble.
But what's happened in the Netherlands? So they have these mafias that have killed a journalist, a lawyer, and they've been able to get a lot of power, a lot of money, and become a threat to the state.
Really? Tell us about this. I haven't heard anything.
There is this journalist that was killed a couple of years ago. He's a very known criminal journalist in the Netherlands. He got shot and to death, and the police linked that to the organized crime. There is a lawyer that was shot to death that was representing a witness that was supposed to witness against the gangs. And we recently had a story from the Netherlands about this, and even the reports and also the police union, they described the situation in the Netherlands that they are like a narco state 2.0.
Wow. So maybe it sounds like more criminalization might be the way.
As far as I understand, from what I've read and heard, is that they're now really there is a discussion now more about should they criminalize it more? Because this is not this has not led to something good so far.
Your avenue into criminal journalism or crime reporting, was that intentional from you, or did you sort of end up there happenstance?
I still don't consider myself as a crime journalist, even though I am working mostly with crimes in Sweden. The reason that I do it is because I've been doing a lot of social journalism, investigative journalism, foreign journalism, and so on. And because of the huge increase of death shootings happening in our more vulnerable areas, that has led to me doing these kind of stories. But I try not to just report that there's been a shooting, but try to understand why it has been a shooting. How could this happen? Were we not aware of this young generation stepping up and trying to take over the power when you had this successful arrests that you've been advertising and saying that you've been now taking control over the problems that you had in your city? So I try to go into the depth of the roots of the problems.
To return to your Serendipity, and you're telling this personal story and linking it to what's happening now, how has your career and life changed since you published this book? Were you surprised by how successful it was?
In a way, yes. I knew I had done a really good... I knew I had explained the complexity of the problem in a good way, but I'm surprised that it's been such a huge success here, and my life has changed in the way that I get to do this kind of interviews with you, and a lot of requests from social workers, teachers, police, all kinds of groups that want to talk, to learn about these problems. They think that I have their answers and the solutions, which I don't. But I think what I can as a journalist, I can speak to everybody. The gangs, the police, the prosecutors, their parents, and so on. And get a quite good perspective on the complexity of the problems. And I realize that if you're a police officer, you might have this tunnel view based on, I mean, from the police perspective or the social worker perspective or the teacher's perspective. So what I can add is maybe just try to help people to understand how this looks from many other perspectives. If you understand what I'm trying to tell you.
100%. 100%. Are they happy to see you when you come knocking on the doors in Dinkaby? They're like, Diamant, my old friend, come in. And they serve you tea and they tell you, they pour their hearts out? Or is it really hard to get access?
Actually, I've seen some guys that I've written about, and some are not happy that I've written about them or their friends. And I've asked them, have you read the book or listened to the book? And most of them say no. And I tell them, read the book, then we can meet and have a discussion. But to many people that are living there, they actually have thanked me. Siblings as well, and older people thank me that I've written the book that tells a story about what's happened in this specific area. And also a lot of people from other areas that really wants to understand the complexity of the problems. They read the book because they want to understand better. And it doesn't matter that this is a conflict that's not in their area. The roots of the problem are similar wherever you live in Sweden. And I hope that the book has led to some people understand what this is all about better, and that can lead to solutions. And I know from what I hear from the people I meet that they are affected they're affected, and that the book has made an impact on them. And some changes have started because of the book as well.
Nice. Well, I won't take up any more of your time. You've been extremely generous.
And tired.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have said I won't take up any more of your time. I'd like to ask you final questions that I ask as many guests as possible.
Sure.
Are you familiar with the word serendipity?
Not really. Serendipity.
Serendipity is the random chance upside an occurrence that happens. You know, you get in a taxi and the driver she becomes your wife one day.
Oh yeah.
So that's serendipity. Could you talk about the role that serendipity has played?
Interesting question. I think, I'm very open to always be positive for when somebody asks me to meet somebody, or if I have a chance to be in a new city just to walk around, because that always leads to a meeting, that you talk to somebody that you would never have met. And in a lot of times you meet somebody that you have a lot in common with. And it's always, you always get something that gives you energy. At least I feel that way. My wife, I don't know if that's serendipity, but I saw my wife on a friend's, like this. When I moved from my home city, I went out night clubbing, and I heard a girl shouting ugly words in Albanian. Started speaking with that girl. She became a friend. That friend, 10 years later, went to Kosovo, where I'm also from, because she also is from Kosovo. And one day she posted some photos on her Facebook. And I saw this very beautiful girl on one of the photos. And that girl is today my wife. So maybe that is that kind of story.
100%. Yeah.
So you never know what happens if you just are open-minded.
100%.
And humble.
So these are definitely not related to the conversation, so forgive me. But the podcast is kind of largely geopolitical-ish. A country you're particularly bullish on.
Bullish, what's that word?
So in investing terms, you're either bullish on something or bearish. If you're bearish, you think that it's got a bad future ahead of it. You don't want to invest in it. But if you think it's going to be good for you, you're bullish on it. So it doesn't mean financially you think it's good, but just you think it has a particularly good future.
I think Sweden still has a good future. I mean, if you would ask most of the people here, they would feel safe. Then their nature is beautiful here. You can walk wherever you want. You can take your tent and sleep wherever you want. And you have all the opportunities here. You don't have to have rich parents. I don't have rich parents. I'm a journalist working for SVT. I've written a book. I've won prizes, blah, blah, blah. And I come from a farm in Kosovo. So I'm very sure that Sweden is a country that will still prosper, even if we have this huge problem at the moment.
Here. Take it from an outsider, a recent outsider, who has now Sweden as his adopted country. I think this is the most exceptional place in the world. I love Sweden. I love Swedes. I see the tremendous opportunity. And, sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see something differently. And I admit, I didn't feel it at first. It took time. But I'm starting to really, love Sweden. And
what do you love most
about Sweden? I think the culture. The country is undeniably beautiful, and the economic opportunities are amazing. But I feel like these days, with remote work and a more distributed economy, that economic opportunities is actually, especially where I work, it's less of a draw card. I think the culture, the Swedes have a tremendous way about them. It's icy to touch, but if you can somehow break through the surface, you really have. It's hard to explain. But
do you feel that people are more warm, open to you now?
No, definitely not. And I don't expect that to change either.
But still you like Sweden?
Yes, because those who initially were icy to touch, and I have warmed up to, I find to be terrific companions. And I'm starting to understand more why they might be that way. And I find myself becoming more Swedish,
Oh, so why are they that way?
Oh, that would just be pure speculation. I could say why, but it would just be pure speculation. Perhaps for another time. But finally, because you've been so generous with your time, the last question, if you could listen to a podcast, a conversation between any two people of history, no language barrier, dead or alive, just two people you would listen to as a podcast.
Putin and Zelensky. Definitely.
It wouldn't just be a shouting match. Do you think there would be a reasonable dialogue?
Maybe not a reasonable dialogue, to be honest. But I think it would be interesting to listen to what they have to say to each other. Yeah. I think they would be interesting to listen to.
Diamant, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thank you too for taking your time.
You need to get the book into Engelska for the people at home.
Yeah, I'll see what happens.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Diamant. It was a thrill to record that with you. I walked into the SVT offices and we sat in a room. If you go on YouTube, you'll see the room. You'll see Diamant himself, the very handsome man. This is, I think, the first of many chats over a lifetime of this podcast with Diamant. He's got an extremely calming presence about him. So thank you again, Diamant. My ambition for this podcast, now, if this is the first time you're hearing me make this plea, then I will keep it short and sharp. My ambition is to corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities in whatever country it is that you happen to be listening in from. And to achieve this ambition, it requires your help. It requires reviews. It requires that you pump your juice into the various algorithms, because discoverability for podcasts, I've been saying this for over a year now, is in the Stone Age. And I'm getting trickling increases of the podcast listenership, but I'd like it to turn a little bit more into a stream and potentially, a gushing waterfall. So to make that happen, we need more discovery. So pump that juice in the algorithm, leave really nice reviews, tell friends about it, make people download the podcast. Thank you again, Diamant. Until next time, ciao, and ciao.